Alabama State Representative Chris Pringle doesn't seem to understand what critical race theory is, but he is sure that it's bad nonetheless, which is why, of course, he tried to ban it. Pringle had pre-filed a bill outlawing the teaching of critical race theory in Alabama schools. Here's what he said about said bill. It's pretty simple. All it says is you can't teach critical race theory in K through 12 or higher education in the state of Alabama. All right. So now he is pressed on, why would you do that? Why is it so important to block critical race theory? What makes it so bad that you can't teach people about it? What is both factually incorrect and wrong about it? Because look, I believe in facts, right? So if the facts are wrong, then of course you don't want to teach that in school. Well, now here's his answer. He says, quote, it basically teaches that certain children are inherently bad people because of the color of their skin, period. I'm sorry, what? That's not what that is. That's not what critical race theory is. Okay, critical race theory. So it basically examines social, cultural, and legal issues as they relate to race and racism. Critical race theorists actually focused on America's history of racism and discrimination continues to impact the country today. So when you look at, for example, policing in America, the justice system, how that relates to race, how black people are treated harsher, you can even tie this into like 1350, for example, how black people tend to be punished harsher, incarcerated for longer, even when doing crimes similar to white people. Or, for example, the response to black culture, popular black culture, media, and how public perceptions of black people are, stereotypes, maybe the idea that they're lazy or they're bums or they're thugs and things like that. All right. So now, what's interesting about critical race theory is that there's actually a pretty interesting critique of liberalism. Here's what they state: quote, critical race theorists believe that political liberalism was incapable of adequately addressing fundamental problems of injustice in American society, notwithstanding, of course, legislation and court rulings advancing civil rights in the 1950s and 60s, because of its emphasis on the equitable treatment under the law of all races, or basically what they consider to be color blindness, and saying that color blindness rendered it capable of recognizing only the most overt and obvious racist practices, for example, like Klan members doing lynchings, all that stuff, not those that were relatively indirect, subtle, or systemic. So, give me an example. Practices like redlining, like denying people jobs based on black-sounding names. Now, and again, they've done studies about this, where people with the exact same qualifications, job histories, everything, would submit applications to jobs, and people with the applications that had black-sounding names would immediately get rejected. With ethnic names, I should say. Not only that, but there's been situations where black people not allowed to wear their natural hair in public settings, or I should say school or professional settings. Not only that, but you have the school to prison pipeline. You have poor performing schools in areas because of the way that property taxes are set up. And of course, you have situations where the black community, black people in general in America, have not had that type of generational wealth in their communities, segregated communities, which of course lead to poor performing schools, lack of investment in those communities. And so you end up having less resources available for education than in traditional white neighborhoods. And so all of those things, that's critical race theory right there. And it's a real simple synopsis of it, but it just shows the interconnectedness of all these different issues. Now, Whitmire went on to ask Pringle to identify somebody who was teaching in Alabama. Again, his original definition is it teaches people that the color of their skin makes them wrong, right? Makes them racist or something like that. No, it basically teaches that certain children are inherently bad because of the color of their skin, period. So that's what, again, Pringle said. And So those of you who are asking, it's Pringle, not Kringle, as in Pringles can't, once you pop, you can't stop. And so now Whitmire went on to ask him, hey, is there somebody who's teaching that in Alabama? And if so, I'd like some examples, please. Here's what Pringle said. These people, when they were doing the training programs and the government, if you didn't buy into what they taught you 100%, they send you away to a re-education camp. The what? Well, that escalated quickly. Wow. Okay. Now, that would be awful if it were true. Okay. So now Pringle went on to say, doesn't say who it was. It just said a government that held these training sessions. The white male executives are sent to a 3-day re-education camp where they were told that their white male culture wasn't there. Yeah, I introduced a very brief version of the bill to start the conversation, but it's very difficult in this cancel society to have a frank discussion about racism in this country and this country's history. I mean, history is being rewritten, and I'm not exactly sure the accuracy of what's there now and what they're trying to change it into. It's still the greatest country that's ever been in the history of the world, and the radical left is trying to destroy that and tear us apart, and divide this country based on race and class, which is exactly what they do in communism. Wow. That escalated quickly, didn't it? Jesus. Notice how that in that rambling answer, there was nothing but buzzwords. He had everything too. Communism, radical left, tearing us apart, re-education camps. Really? He's got no idea. And maybe because he doesn't care, because it's pretty easy to look up what it actually is. But look, the reason that he's pushing this should be fairly obvious. Right now, critical race theory is something that conservatives are frothing at the mouth at. All right? Fox News, since March, mentioned it on their channel over 1,300 times. Jesus. Wow. They're obsessed. And by the way, they can't define it. All they know is critical race theory. Bad. Now, I happen to believe that learning our history is good. I think that if we learn from the past, then we can avoid the mistakes of the past and create a better future for all Americans, everybody. Now, unfortunately, that means confronting some really bad truths about what we have done, or I should say what our government has done as a country to people, not just black people, but also other minorities, Chinese people, other Asians, even going back to Irish people. And so, we haven't exactly treated people of different races and colors very well in this country. But black people tend to have gotten the worst of it as a result of chattel slavery. And the effects of that. Jim Crow, segregation, and what continues today. And it's still a part of that. So all of that, in order to fix those problems, the legacy of that, which does still affect people today, yes, Native Americans, Japanese Americans, absolutely. So many great examples of just the horribleness. And by the way, we're not the only country that's treated indigenous people terribly. Canada as well has had a huge, huge problem with erasing, ethnically cleansing indigenous people. So I don't think that it's just America that needs to have a real hard look at some of the stuff that they've done in the past, their government. So you really have to look at that stuff, warts and all. And there are some warts. But anybody who's interested in real social progress and correcting those wrongs so that we all move on as one people united under the flag, well, you would need to look at that stuff. But there would be one reason where somebody wouldn't want to look at that. Well, that reason, of course, would be pretty simple. Racism. I mean, Look, a lot of people think that, no, race relations are fine. What are you talking about? No problem here. Working is intended. Well, if you think that way, and you know the actual history, and there's something, well, that says something about it, right? Now, if you don't know the history, and a lot of people don't, there is an ignorance about this, right? Now, ignorance can be fixed. Ignorance doesn't necessarily mean like you're a bad person, okay? If you don't know the history, if you're never exposed to the history, well, then that's exactly what critical race theory and education is there to try to fix. Once you learn the history and you're like, oh, crap, you're right, this is bad. We should do something about this. Wow, I didn't realize. That's great. That's what we want. But then there are people who learn the history and think, nope, totally justified, totally fine. 100%. Well, then that's the problem. And that problem isn't with the education. That problem is with the person. Ignorance can be fixed. Racism actually can also be fixed. But it actually takes a lot longer, more time, more effort, and is never really ever guaranteed. But at least you should try. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.